Welcome to the first part of the video series covering interviews and how to ace your interviews. This is often misunderstood, often thought, therefore I thought it was very important to give you a quick introduction on how to do interviews. What made me maybe a better person to give this series? Well, the very simple reason is that I've been working as a consultant for quite a few years, meaning that very frequently I get interviewed. And I see a lot of patterns coming back, and therefore I thought, let's give the best practices such that you can prepare yourself and ace interviews, no matter which position you're aiming for. So this is part one. Part two will be covered in a different video. Part one will be focusing on the preparation part in the most detailed fashion. So when you do interviews, it's very much a new skill, and it's often like overlooked. It's like a kitten learning its first steps in the world, and that's interviews as well. And every interview, no matter how much experience you have, will feel like as a novelty. So having a good, let's say, standard practice to it, or a good approach to it, will help you to land interviews in a smooth fashion. So therefore, this kind of a roadmap in how to set yourself up for success if you want to do interviews. And if we start diving into it, there are actually two options you might have, working for others and working for yourself. And people think like, oh, if you work for others, yes, you have interviews, and work for yourself, that's not the case. But let's not mistake, and there are a lot of overlap to be noticed. First of all, when you start working for others, it's an agreement where you say, I follow the business model, I follow the culture, the leadership of an organization. It can be private or public, and that organization is built for a certain purpose. Sometimes it's services, product services. It can be also pure governmental, but it is accepting a different way of working under a certain umbrella, and that's the deal. You accept that will be the condition, and in return for your time, energy, and qualifications, and skill sets and expertise, you'll be paid. Very straightforward. So that's the exchange you have here. Now, if you will be working for yourself, you're dealing with clients, and sometimes the clients also require interviews. I, for example, often go to interviews, classical interviews, just because the clients want to know the details of how I would approach certain things. That doesn't make it always easy, because each time when I meet a new client, I go to these interviews. Some of you will be solo entrepreneurs, like a business to business or business to customers. But even in one way or another, you'll be dealing with interviews because you might be hiring people. So it's good to understand also when you are going for this session, for this option, that you will be dealing with interviews in one way or another. So the first thing to remember is your recruiter is human. And humans make mistakes, and they make a lot of mistakes. You're really surprised how many mistakes are made when people are recruiting. But that is something that you will very quickly realize, that how many mistakes are made in recruiting process. It's getting better, but beware that the person sitting in front of you is very human. And just as you as a human, they make mistakes as well. So keep that in mind. You're sitting with a human person who's reaching out to make a connection. And therefore, it's your role to make that connection as well. So it's always good to remember that interviews are working in two directions. Yes, a company wants to know who you are and what you can contribute, but also you from your position. It's very important to understand, hey, do I really want to work for these guys? Or can I do the job? Or is there a real match? Do I need to relocate for that position? So an interview is always a question in both directions. And it's not always a very open, meaning everybody is closing their cards a little bit, they're holding their cards close to them. But also it's important for you to do that as well. I mean, it's not because you're playing open card that therefore will do the same with you. It is sometimes a very tricky negotiation, so be aware of that. Now, before we move more forward, it's important to understand the concept of a model of the world, no comment. This is a coaching concept that is used to describe that each individual has their way of looking at the world. And the way everybody looks at the world is based on their upbringing, their parents, their culture. It can be their their overall national culture, the way of thinking, maybe the teachers they had. So we come to a certain way of looking at the world from our own perspective. If you take another person, they've gone through the same process. They also have a model of the world, and sometimes these model of the worlds are clashing with each other, and that creates conflicts. So it's always good to understand the person sitting in front of you. They might have a very specific opinion about something, but it's always good to keep in mind, okay, it's their model of the world. I'm not going to comment on that. Now, they might question on that. They say, how do you like my model of the world? To buy you in, for example, the company has also a model of the world. Do you buy in that way of thinking? And so you have to be careful at where you switch off and lean in, so to speak, because this model of the world is something that everybody does, that every organization does, and everybody believes their model of the world is the most correct one, the most complete one. Of course, it's not. We have a lot of blind spots, and therefore we lose out of information. So does the recruiter, and so does companies. So it's a good concept to understand that you are biased, but so is the recruiter, and it's about matchmaking these two worlds such that it can move forward. Now, a book I would recommend. It's called Beyond Reason, and this is about negotiation, but from the emotional point of view. It is written by Roger Fisher and Daniel Shapiro from the Harvard Negotiation Project. So, by the way, in Harvard, they have done, especially Harvard Law School, they did a lot of research on how to negotiate. So they were at Harvard Negotiation Project, and POM, the network in Harvard in law school that has been setting up the negotiation concept and theory around it. This is a really excellent book. So this book I've been using since the moment I read it, and I've been applying it still up to today. Whether we have interviews, interactions with managers or with peers, you name it, or with the team that I'm managing, this is a very solid way of dealing with emotions and how to look at other people's emotions. So please look into that. I'll be covering 3 topics here. The preparation part will be covered in this part of the video. Interview itself and the review of interviews will be covered in the second part, but let's dive into the preparation part. The preparation part, as you might guess, is the most important part, and that will set you up for success. It is not a full guarantee that therefore you will have success, but the preparation part is really, really critical, so that you can absorb the most shocks of what will come to you when you have an interview. Now, when you see a job description and you say, hey, I'm interested and I want to apply for it, there's always this to say, what are the 3 main messages I want to bring across? It might be that, hey, I've done something similar before. I did something. I did something when I was a job student, or I'm skilled, I'm qualified for it, or I'm really, really interested in the company. So these are the messages, and that's something always to have in mind. So it's nice to have a post-it note somewhere, stick it on your computer to remind you what are the 3 main messages I want to bring across in that interview. And also when you go to interview, make sure you have it with you, like a small piece of paper, post-it note on the computer, it's online. These are the 3 messages that I really want to bring across. Now, there's a certain rank order of steps, and that's very important to point out. Sure, we talk about interviews, but before when you're sending your CV, it's about very much of branding yourself. It's fact-based, of course. The application, CV, and cover letter is the only purpose of it is getting invited for an interview, nothing more. And the purpose of an interview is getting invited for the next round of interviews. To be clear, if you look for a good layout of a CV, I mean, you can go to Canva. Canva is a brilliant concept and a database of a lot of templates, a lot of templates for CVs, because that will help you forward to have a really professional CV. Now, why do I say this rank order of steps? Because the hard negotiation on pricing, fees and wishes and demands you might have, that only starts when you have an offer, not before. So in the beginning, it's a very gentle game of asking, okay, how much you want to be paid, but it's not about being hardcore negotiator and to get your wishes on the table. That is for much later. So you need to understand that 2 phases. Okay, first of all, the CV to brand yourself, but the interviews is just to to continue to the next rounds, and ideally to get an offer. And only then, when you get an offer, you can really go to the details of the offer itself, but not before. A lot of people don't realize it, but there are actually only 3 questions that people can ask you during interviews, and everything else are variations of it. What are these 3 questions? The 3 core questions. First question will be, can you do the work? The second question will be, are you willing to do the work? Are you motivated? And the third question will be, can we work together? And all other questions are variations of that in one way or another. So it's always good to remind you, these are the 3 questions they always ask. Can you reply it in such a way that they say, yes, 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 you can do the work. That guy is willing to do the work. Yeah, the guy's really nice. I want to work with that person. So the interview has to be convinced about answers on these 3 questions. It has to be very, very clear. Just to give you an example, there are many, many examples online where you can look at the classical interview questions. And I gave here some questions that comes from a website, from Indeed.com. And I just pick out some of them just to give you an idea of like the classical, typical question they will ask. Tell me about yourself. The typical first question, tell me about yourself. That's an opening question. And tell me about yourself, your qualifications. Basically, they ask you, can you do the work? Are you willing to do the work? And can work together in one way or another? So if you have been already thinking about that, you can already cover these 3 core questions by answering that question. Why do you want to work at this company? That's a motivation question. Why are you willing? Are you willing enough to work here? So why do you want to work at this company? That's again one of the core questions. At the bottom, for example, what is your greatest accomplishment? That shows like, hey, have you done similar work that's aligned with the work we are doing? So for it's the exercise of making that link and helping them understand that, hey, this is my CV. I've been doing similar work. Or I have a background. I studied it. Therefore, I have a great match for that function. Other question can be, why should we hire you? Again, if they ask that question often towards the end, then they say again, look, that you can do the work, that you're willing to do work, and then you can work together, and that you have been proven that in the past. Again, why should we hire you? Comes back again to the 3 core questions. So always have these 3 core questions in mind, because that will help you forward. There's also sometimes the question of what your salary range expectation. I would be very careful to answer that. It's good to understand for each role, you can find it online, what the range is for the type of function and organization and region and country, things like that. So it's good to help you to understand what you can ask. But you can say in the first reply, say, look, this is benchmark. This should be benchmark range and things like that. So you need to be very careful before giving final numbers, because if you give a final number, one number, it's like it becomes an anchor, and people will stick to that as an anchor and use it as a benchmark. So you don't want to give them a benchmark, but the best one is to give them a range. But do your research on that before you give ranges. Otherwise, if you don't know the ranges, don't tell them anything at all. You say, look, you have to look into that, and I'll come back to them later. So what's really, really critical for you? Research your company. Have a good understanding what they do, where they come from, where they're going. Check out the news articles online, what's happened with them. Check out LinkedIn profiles. Check out the services. Check out how people are responding to that company. Things like that. What are the products? Are you happy about the products? Do you know the products? Is it aligned with what you can do and offer? Things like that. It's really, really important to research the company, and you can go pretty deep on that. You can have a good idea about the company, the website, but also the financial reports of a public company. That will give you a good idea. Now, a good trick though is also to research the person, the interviewer you're going to see. Often we get the name ahead. You'll say you meet this person online or in reality, or mean in face to face. It's good to have a quick check on LinkedIn. Who is that person? What has the person studied? And also what type of career? If you see a person jumping career very quickly, you understand, this is strange. It moves quite too fast. It's not always positive. It might look positive on paper, but in reality it's not a good sign. If somebody has been jumping every year to a different role, that means that that person has never been working completely and integrating the function completely. It's always a bad sign. So it's good to understand again what the interviewer, how that person might be acting and thinking. It might be that the person has been going to the same university. That might be a topic point, or having done similar sports, things like that. So there are a lot of things they can use. Very subtle, by the way. You have to be very careful with that. But it gives you an idea of who's sitting in front of you and where that person comes from. Now, a good recommendation I have is to read the book The First 90 Days. The first 3 months are often the challenging phase in any starting up in the onboarding process in any organization. Most companies are really bad at it, onboarding. They don't give you any guidance. It's like, help yourself. It's kind of weird. But this book gives a good overview of what you can think about, the steps you can take the first 90 days. So it's the proven strategies for getting up to speed, faster and smarter by Michael Watkins. I highly recommend it. It's an international bestseller. I've been using it frequently when I go to a new role to reflect on, okay, what could be my steps. But this is really going to be helpful to get you an idea of where you want to go. But also during the interview, when you have been thinking about it, this can be a question, like how will you start up? How will you integrate yourself in that role? How will you approach the learning process? The first 90 days covers that in very much detail. The second book I would recommend is the Clifton StrenghtsFinder. There's now the second verse called 2.0. What do I mean by that? This is a philosophy saying that you should be focusing on your strengths, because we have all negatives. And unless that negative is really, let's say, damaging the rest, but if you focus on the strengths and you build your career around it, you will do very well. That's the idea behind it. So the Clifton StrengthsFinder will give you 5 strengths. Sometimes surprising, you say, oh, you didn't know. Some of them you might not be aware of it, but it gives you a good idea, what are your strengths? And that you can use in interviews. These are my 5 strengths. But also every strength, beware, has also a shadow side, meaning if you're good, let's say, in taking responsibility, the shadow side is that people might take advantage of it. If you are really much detail orientated, as a strength, the problem might be that you are missing the big picture. So strengths, also weaknesses. But nevertheless, this is a good starting point for you to dive into it. And it has also a test online, so you can score yourself and you can read about it. It's a perfect way to understand yourself better, and it helps you also your interview process in a very, very straightforward fashion. Now, the other element I want to pick out very briefly is there's a change happening in over generations. Actually, is the average length of time spent in a role by generation, by a survey done by Career Builder, and you see that the baby boomers, on average in a role, they will stay 8 years and 3 months. But you see by the younger generation, it goes almost to 2 years and 3 months. Now, I would be very careful with that because there's a logic behind it. There is some companies that have this very quick switchovers, like every 2 years you have a new function. But be careful with that, because normally, if you aim at 3 years, is a very good average. And let's explain. The first year when you do a role, all of this is pretty new, and you have to learn how the company works, thinks, and operates, and sometimes in internal politics, and have the tools in place or not in place. So you learn a lot of tools of best working practices. This is the first year. The second year, you start building up on that. And you start getting really, really good at efficient and effective. You start moving forward. And the third year, you can harvest from that. After you have been learning the first 2 years, you can really, really enjoy the fruits of all the efforts you put in there in the first 2 years. So aiming for at least 3 years in a new role. Of course, it depends on the situation and depends on the company and the project. But 3 years is a very good target to aim for. I found the 3-year benchmark to be working very well. But also when you have in your CV a 3-year, let's say, block, it's really impressive because they know that you have been dealing also with difficult situations. Difficult situations often pops up in the second year and sometimes in the third year. So if you have been able to overcome these difficulties, that's always good in the next projects you have in the same company you applied for or in other companies. So 3 years is a good benchmark to aim for. So if they ask you, okay, how long do you think you plan to be in this role? You can say, well, at least 3-4 years. I think I'm going to learn a lot. I'm going to explore a lot. And therefore, I think 3-4 years is a good benchmark. If it's 3 years, fine. If it's 4 years, also fine. If it's less, then it can be okay, but it can become difficult. So be aware of that. 3 years is a perfect benchmark. Now, another thing you can do is so-called building up your own success portfolio in preparation. What I mean by that? You have been, probably even as a student, you have been leading some projects. You have been dealing with projects, project management. You might have been in a team, a sports team, whatever. You have been doing conflict resolution, and you have been influencing in one way or another. Because these 5, let's say, buckets, in one way or another, are relevant for working in a company or any organization, whether it's a profit or non-profit or you name it. They will ask you things like, oh, can you give an example where you were leading a team? You're every 2 of them, leading and team. And then you even have a good case to bring, then it's really impressive. And then they like that. So if you have 3 to 5 success stories that you know by heart, and they are true, by the way, related to these 5 buckets of topics, you will do very well during your interview. Now, there's also a way of presenting it, so-called the STAR method. Some people also call it a STAR interview. Some companies go for STAR interviews, and they ask for what situation, what are the tasks, what action you took, and what were the results. For example, imagine that you were doing marketing in the last year, and one of the projects you were dealing with is that for at least 1 month, you were, let's say, the manager of a team, a small team for 1 month. So you were in charge, the lead, to do marketing research, let's say, in elderly homes. I just make something up. And so the situation is, look, for my final year, everybody else has at least 1 year leadership experience leading a team with one specific project. In this case was a marketing survey dealing with healthcare, for example, in elderly homes or retirement homes, you name it. And that's the situation. The task was to have successful completion, to get the data in. And also for me, the task was to manage the team in such a way that people were stimulated and such that we get all the data in. So the action was, for example, you visited, let's say, 5 retirement homes. We have been splitting up the work. You have been clearly giving a framework how to collect the data, who does what, so that you had a structured approach to come to a resolution to get the results in. And you can say the results was in such a way done. Everybody was very happy in the collaboration, and our project was picked as the top 1 winning project in the department, so that we got the full recognition of that, and also the highest marks in our degree. And that's the situation. It could also be that this situation was linked with the job application. You can say, well, I know that your organization is working with retired homes regarding healthcare. And that project really made me fascinated about an aspect I didn't know about, retirement homes. And therefore, this STAR method approach to describing it helps the client, your recruiter, the interviewer, understand, hey, yes, I am a good candidate because I love working with retirement homes and healthcare, and I'll be doing that. And I know your organization is doing that. So therefore, you already explained success story linking up with what the company is doing. Okay, look, be very careful. It has to be correct. I'll just make something up that could be true, but you might find a success story that is really relevant for that company. So you create your new, you design your new success story following the STAR method, so that when they ask you about leadership and teamwork, things like that, and project management, that you have an example ready, matching already the role you will do in the future. If you do that, I can guarantee you score big time. So that is therefore the STAR method in your STAR in success portfolio approach is going to be very, very relevant. Now, of course, fact-based, always fact-based, use facts, and don't lie, never lie. Make sure that's all true. Write this out, get it on paper, and also fine-tune with the position you want to apply for. So, and also the story you want to tell. So be aware of it to work on that. Now, something completely different is so-called 7, 38, and 55 rule. And what's meant by that is that we communicate and we think that words are the most important thing. in our communication. Actually, there was a study done some years ago at UCLA. 7% of the words are important, and 38% is a tone you have. And you can work with your tone. You can say, look, I want to do this. Also body language. So having a positive, open body language and with a smiling body language, you create a different environment and vibe versus sitting very closed and speaking in a very low tone and changing your tone. So changing your way you communicate and your body language, being positive, look, I'm really interested to work with you guys, and this is a story, this is my success stories, I've been doing this and doing this and this. I'm really interested in your job, I can do the job, I'm willing to do the job, and yeah, we can work together. I can see we have alignment here. So 7, 38, 55, keep that in mind, that actually body language is going to be very, very critical, whether it is face-to-face or online. Now, do practice runs with a trusted friend. What I mean by that, give them that list of 28 questions and start practicing. Give your trusted friend an idea about the company. It's possible that they know the company very well, or they might have their family working there. So they might give you already some questions and they start acting as an interviewer, and it gives you the confidence to be very spot on when they ask questions. Now, it gives you some confidence. It's not a full guarantee. You will have sometimes a question that is completely weird, but this will help you to be successful in your interviews when you do practice runs. Now, that brings us to the first part, the closure of the first part. For the second part, go to the other video and I'll see you there.